Making mistakes has got to be one of the most annoying things when trying to learn any new hobby. It can go so far as to discourage you from continuing to learn that hobby. Kill me. In this video, I'm going to share with you some of the most common mistakes that I see beginners making in the hobby of miniature painting and how to avoid them. And I bet you're not going to guess number one. Okay, BuzzFeed! If you truly want to improve at miniature painting and you don't view the hobby as simply a roadblock to playing games, you need to stop using washes, contrast paint, speed paint, express paint, and everything similar.
Scott, you can't take this from us.
Hold up, let me explain. All of these products are meant to be used as a painting shortcut. They remove the critical, artistic thinking in favor of speed and simplicity, which is a good thing if that's what you want. The problem is that they do a bad job of emulating how light actually works on your model, and more importantly, by using them, you never really learn that fundamental skill, placing your own highlights and shadows. By doing this step manually, you take back control of so many choices: what color your shadows and highlights will be, where they're placed, which implies where the light is coming from, what kind of material each part of your miniature is made up of. Contrast paint, washes, and similar are dumb for better or worse. They take away those decisions in favor of a default. Don't get me wrong, I still use these products for simple things like belts and pouches and boots, but when it comes to the main important details, I leave them behind almost every single time. Whether I'm speed painting a quick character for my Warhammer army or painting a display model. If you need help with employing this tip, I talk about it a lot in this video, which I've linked below, and also extensively go over highlight and shadow placement in my masterclass course on painting my miniature, the Ranger, also linked down in the description. The problem with foregoing the world of washes and contrast paints can unfortunately cause our next problem, however. When painters leave behind the GW painting method of base coat, wash, highlight, or something that lends more control, like discussed in tip number one, a very common problem occurs. I see paint jobs from beginners trying to improve all the time that look like this. I call this issue the island problem. Now I know what you're thinking. That's not a beginner paint job, and you'd be right. But despite all the other advanced techniques going on this miniature, the issue of islands or painting in your own highlights and shadows is very much so still a beginner issue. Basically, every volume on the model, which is a 3D shape, like an individual muscle, is aggressively and uniformly painted in a contrasting way that looks off, like each part of the model is on its own little individual island. The problem here is that every single volume is painted with the same intensity of shadow, and it's done so uniformly that it looks unnatural. Shadow intensity comes from two things: how dark the paint is that you're using, but also how much space it occupies on your model. You can tackle this problem by cranking on either of those two levers. Sometimes it's enough to reduce the size of the shadow to a nice thin dark line, and that lessens the overall visual impact of the shadow enough to eliminate this problem. Other times, you need to literally use a shadow that isn't so dark. Consider using darker shadows on the lower parts of the model and lighter shadows on the higher up part. This creates a natural gradient from dark to light, drawing the viewer's eyes up to the most important parts of the mini, the head, shoulders, and chest. While we're on a subject, you can follow this same wisdom with highlights, getting brighter and brighter the closer you get to the top. However, bright colors come with their own problems, which we'll get to after this sponsor message. I'm a huge fan of graphic t-shirts. It's easily the one article of clothing that I have the most of, whether they're cool video game shirts, awesome metal bands, or just sick designs, which is why Into the AM and myself get along quite well. The team at Into the AM are full-on, passionate creators working on awesome designs for their clothing. So many of their designs are colorful and psychedelic, like this one. They remind me of some of my favorite 80s movies that feature crazy, vibrant worlds and characters like Flash Gordon. They also get one thing that's so crucial right when it comes to making t-shirts. They're soft. I was recently playing volleyball in a not so nice shirt, and like Andy Bernard from The Office, my nips started to chafe. Your nips will be in good hands with Into the AM, which I doubt they want me to say, but it's true. To check out more of their product range and save your nips, click the link in the description and get 10% off these premium made tees. All right, back to my list of tips. I see a lot of people struggling with pure white and other lighter colors, claiming that their painting attempts look chalky. Firstly, you may just be using too much white. A lot of what we believe is white in the real world is actually many shades of gray. In the brightest area, it may be really close to pure white, but otherwise is largely not in real life and also in art. If you back off a bit with pure white, you may find that some of your chalky issues go away, but they may not be solved entirely. Another reason this problem happens is because lighter colors struggle to cover darker colors. If you jump up too fast in brightness, you'll often not apply enough layers of paint to get true opacity. And when you keep jumping up in highlights and don't reach full opacity on any of the layers of lighter colors you're using, you start to get a chalky effect. When it comes to working with lighter colors, you need to go slowly. Gradually increase the brightness of your highlight, apply multiple layers of the exact same paint if necessary to reach the opacity you want. Now, what if you're working with lighter colors and instead of using layering, you're using different blending methods like wet blending? Well, you actually may want to avoid that. I think beginners should avoid confusing blending techniques. I'm talking about feathering, glazing, wet blending, two-brush blending, and anything that goes beyond good old-fashioned layering, especially if you're just learning. If you're on the journey of improving and you're foregoing the use of washes and contrast paint, this is especially true. The hardest thing you're going to struggle with is just having the thing you're painting look like the color you want it to look like. It's more challenging than you think. There's no reason to struggle with that and also how to accomplish all those confusing techniques at the same time. I could honestly paint for the rest of my life and never use those blending methods if they were eradicated from human memory due to some kind of brain bioweapon deployed by aliens. Again, there's nothing wrong with these techniques, and oftentimes they can speed up your process or are just better suited to specific situations. But for someone who is learning how to paint minis better and it's just at the beginning of that journey, it isn't worth it. It's especially not worth it if it's going to discourage you from painting, which happens for so many different reasons, which leads into my next tip. Time to get real. Beginners are the hobbyists that I often see worrying the most about what kind of gear they have, which leads to them putting their art on hold while they collect equipment like Pokemon. They're discouraged from starting until all the ducks are in a row, which honestly makes sense. You want to start off on the best foot possible, avoiding any kind of limitation by your tool set. In the beginning, there are so many unknowns, and this approach to painting seems like it covers a lot of potential problems. But there is a massively important part of your tool set that you're forgetting about. You. It does not matter what paint range you have, what brushes you're using, what airbrush you're highlighting with, if you yourself don't have the dedication required to diligently practice. When I was little, I wanted an Element skateboard, and at the time I had a crappy Walmart one. My mom told me that I could have the nice skateboard if I proved to her that I could do 10 tricks on the crappy one, effectively showing her, and more importantly myself, that I was invested in that hobby enough to earn the nicer stuff. And that lesson has stuck with me well into my 30s, and I think it's going to for a lot longer. Prove to yourself that you deserve the nice airbrush by first getting some results. Look, I'm not trying to save you money. I know a lot of you have adult jobs and you can afford as many miniatures and paints as you want. That isn't the point. The problem is that people often delay and delay and delay until they can get what they perceive as the golden set of tools. It becomes more of a tool collection hobby than it is a painting one. You don't need a lot to get excellent results. In fact, the better you become, the more you can get by with less, which is nature being funny in a cruel kind of way. We exist in a day and age when virtually every hobby paint range is incredibly usable, and models from a lot of ranges are super high quality. Just get after it, bud. But what if you really want to get better? What's the best way to get after it? One consideration that's incredibly important when it comes to improving is to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. In a recent video on the Veritasium channel discussing how to become an expert, Derek, the host, discusses how experts are always expanding their skill sets.
But in order to learn, you have to be practicing at the edge of your ability, pushing beyond your comfort zone. You have to use a lot of concentration and methodically, repeatedly attempt things you aren't good at.
Admittedly, for a while now, I've been very satisfied with my level of skill in the hobby and have been mostly just leaning on what I already know how to do because it feels nice to be comfortable. But if I truly want to improve, I need to shake it up. Recently, I've attempted a full model OSL paint job, which will be in a future video, because I'm not comfortable with that technique, and I want to become better. Identify an area of comfort for you and just change it slightly. Instead of painting your 69th Krieg Guardsman, nice, try a bust version instead. Instead of true metallic metals, this time try non-metallic metals. Instead of washing your blue cloak in Nuln Oil, try to mix black into the blue and paint the shadows in manually. This is hard because it's not fun to be bad at things or achieve results that are worse than we can already know we can accomplish. To make it more palatable, here's some advice. Don't try more than one new big thing at once. If all you've ever painted is 32mm Space Marines, don't paint a bust that has a ton of skin showing. Paint a 32mm miniature that has some skin showing so you can take each new topic in bite-sized chunks. Not seeing results is a very frustrating thing, I get it. But as a beginner, you have to remember something. You know what all beginners at anything share in common? They're bad. You're bad at miniature painting, and you know what? That's fine. We live in a day and age where there are so many frustratingly good artists at our fingertips, and they keep coming. I often make the mental leap in my brain to think of my entire Instagram feed as one person that I have to outperform in terms of quality and quantity, which is just plain stupid and something I'll never be able to accomplish unless I just unfollow everyone. Seriously, how can you expect yourself to paint as well as others who have had years invested? Go easy on yourself. It doesn't matter if you ruin that fancy model you bought. In order to learn how to paint fancy models, you need to first learn how to ruin them and then fix those mistakes. That is step number one, and you can't avoid it. So either paint none of them or start carving up those minis. Paint is not a destructive material. In a worst case scenario, you can just strip it off if you really don't like it. But I have a feeling you'll like the results just fine. This hobby and all creative skills are a journey. I personally don't believe in individuals who are naturally talented at specific tasks. To me, it's people who are willing to put in the work and those who aren't. It takes diligent hours of practice, review, and operating at the edge of our skill level to improve, so expect to invest that if you want to get better. Nothing comes for free, not even the most fundamental hobby technique. Base coating a model in your first layer of paint is a crucial moment in miniature painting, and there's a lot of ways you can mess it up. There are a few things we can consider that will make it easier, however. One, you need to leave the paint alone. After you've applied a layer of paint, you have like 5 seconds to really mess with it until it starts to dry. It's like an egg in a hot pan. If you don't touch the egg, it'll cook to a solid layer of white. If you touch it while it's still cooking, you start to scrape up the bits that are cooked and they mix with the still wet parts. The more you do that, the more your paint job starts to look like scrambled eggs. If you do this repeatedly while building up layers of brighter and brighter colors, by the end, you may be fully obscuring details that are soft, like face wrinkles and the like. Put a layer of paint down, mess with it for 5 seconds, and then no matter what it looks like, let it dry. Sure, it may look really bad. You may still see the undercoat quite a bit, but let it dry. Give it a second layer, a third layer, and you'll build up a beautiful, solid base coat. Another piece of advice is understanding how brushes and moisture work. When you lift your brush off of the model, a little puddle of paint deposits right at that point. Consider not lifting your brush up near a recessed part. If you're painting a shoulder pad on a Space Marine, don't lift your brush near the trim, but rather in the middle of the shoulder pad. The pool of paint will spread out across that nice soft surface, obscuring no details. You want to coat every part of the model, ideally in an even layer of paint. And when you can tell that's not happening, use the tip of the brush to wick away some of that buildup, but don't do it too much. 5 seconds. The most important advice in this section is to not touch the paint once it's drying. If you can do that, the other details I mentioned are what you can start to worry about, but don't do it until you've accomplished that first fundamental thing. Sometimes, however, it doesn't matter how long you wait. Some things just never dry. A while back in another video similar to this one, I recommended the use of acrylic white ink for the purposes of applying a zenithal undercoat. Basically, a white to dark gradient that kind of shows you where your highlights and shadows should go. If you paint with transparent products like contrast paint or simply diluted regular acrylic paint, those products will be brighter where your undercoat is brighter and darker where it's more shadowed. The real problem, however, is that this white ink has a tendency to reactivate when applying products like washes and contrast paints, like it never fully dried in the first place. A much better product for applying a zenithal undercoat is Tamiya Flat White. It thins with X20A like a dream and applies very smoothly without losing opacity super quickly like normal white acrylic paint tends to do. The best part is it's rock solid and doesn't reactivate with any additional moisture once nice and dry. Definitely consider replacing your white ink with this stuff for undercoating purposes. Before priming and undercoating, however, there's an even more essential step in this hobby that beginners get wrong all the time. Almost every beginner I talk to always brings up how a model would be easier to paint if it were in separate pieces. And while that is true, it's almost never worth it. Firstly, you complicate the prep stage of the model because you need to figure out how to comfortably hold all these weird pieces that aren't simply attached to a model that's glued to a base. Do you use double-sided tape, poster tack, pinning, a combination of these things? Do you attach them to a chunk of wood or cork or something shaped specifically for that weird piece, like a character who's mounted on a horse? Secondly, and probably most importantly, you waste so much precious time on painting parts of the model that'll never be seen. If you paint a fully assembled model, the parts that are hard to reach are likely also the parts that are hard to see anyways. Lastly, you have to now assemble all of these individual parts once painted, which gets tricky because you're potentially damaging the paint job, possibly getting glue on them. And what happens when you have a gap that needs filling on two parts that are already painted? It's a can of worms that's rarely worth it. At most, I keep the heads of my minis off to make that part easier to paint, because very often attaching them after the fact is really simple. But beyond that, I don't do any subassembly painting, pretty much. If you guys enjoyed this video, I'll have 2 more videos just like it linked in the description and also at the end of the video that are a list of helpful tips to improve at the hobby of miniature painting. Don't forget to check out this video's sponsor, Into the AM. If you like the channel and you want to support it and the future development of miniature education on the internet, I have a lot of ways to do that. Most notably, my web store linked down in the description, which has a bunch of awesome tools like this brush box for holding your paintbrushes and other similarly shaped tools, awesome cutting mats that are thick and double-sided with an imperial grid on one side and a metric on the other with alternate art on both sides, merch of my own, models, and also masterclass courses that teach you how to paint models start to finish and also supply you with all the education you need to paint those models. They're not just simply a walkthrough, they also include tons of information about volumetric highlighting, blending, and so many topics. There are several courses from different instructors, so you get a different kind of vibe from each one, and they all go over how to paint the box art of the model. When the masterclass course is purchased together with the miniature, you get it at a discount. And if you don't want to buy a physical mini, I also have STL minis that can also be bundled with their respective masterclass course. Subscribe or die! And most importantly, don't forget to paint more metal!